save you a lot of frustration at work. If you want Gen Z to stop listening instantly, just start your sentence with, let's circle back and leverage synergy. Welcome back to Speaking with Confidence, the podcast that helps you build the soft skills that lead to real results. Communication, storytelling, public speaking, and showing up with confidence in every conversation that counts. I'm Tim Newman, a recovering college professor turned communication coach, and I'm thrilled to guide you on a journey to become a powerful communicator. A few years ago, I stood in front of a room full of college seniors and tried my best to light a fire under them. I had been telling them for years the importance of networking. Some listened, some did not, and this was one of my last chances to get the point across. I went with what I thought was the right professional approach, telling them that they needed to start preparing for professional development opportunities and networking strategically. The response was total silence and a room full of blank stares that made it feel like I was speaking a dead language. I took a breath and decided to try again with a different angle. I told them that since graduation was coming up, they needed to realize that their GPA wouldn't get them a job on its own, but the people they knew actually would. The room woke up instantly as hands flew into the air and questions started coming from everywhere. And that was the moment I realized the problem isn't that Gen Z lacks ambition or doesn't want to work. The real issue is that most managers and leaders are still using the language that Gen Z stopped listening to years ago. Tim Elmore, who literally wrote the book on leading this generation, found that 75% of managers struggle today because they're speaking the wrong language. They rely on boss speak, and that habit kills trust and engagement before a conversation even has a chance to start. You might wonder why polished corporate language evaporates trust so quickly with a 24-year-old. It happens because Gen Z grew up online as the ultimate BS detectors, and they've been expert contact readers since they were old enough to swipe screen. When a leader leans on vague corporate syntax, every alarm bell in their head goes off. They don't hear professional tone, they hear a lack of transparency. To make this concrete, we can look at 3 specific phrases that almost guarantee your team will stop listening. If you tell them you want to circle back, leverage your synergy, or align our strategic objectives, you've already lost them. You might think this is just how the business world functions, but to a Gen Z's ear, these words are a signal that you're being indirect or maybe even manipulative. When you say circle back, they hear you don't have time for them. And leveraging synergy sounds like you have no idea how the team should actually work together. If you tell them you need to align strategic objectives, they assume you haven't actually figured out what the goal is yet. The real cost here isn't just a few eye rolls in the break room. Trust evaporates the second your language feels inauthentic, and you simply cannot lead people who don't trust you. Tim Elmore's research makes it clear that hierarchy doesn't command respect in the modern office, but clarity definitely does. Your title might give you authority, but your influence comes from being understood and staying credible. This is where the first part of my public speaking formula applies to leadership. You have to know your audience, and sometimes you have to say the quiet part out loud. Gen Z respects radical directness because they have zero patience for the corporate dance. If a project is falling behind because someone made a mistake, you should just say that. If you're asking someone to take on extra work because it helps their chances of a promotion, tell them the truth. The moment you stop hiding behind a corporate glossary and state the plain facts, you start building real credibility. You lose the facade of having every single answer, but you gain something much more valuable: their attention and a real chance to be heard. If boss speak is officially dead, you might be wondering what the new language actually sounds like. Now, to be clear, this isn't about trying to learn Gen Z slang or forcing memes into your meetings, which is a move I'm begging you to avoid at all costs. The real goal is translating the core principles of good leadership into plain, human talk that feels like a conversation rather than a PowerPoint presentation. This shift comes down to 2 big changes in how you communicate, starting with the explain the why first principle. While this idea is rooted in decades of motivational psychology, the basic takeaway is that people need autonomy, mastery, and purpose to actually care about their work. When you skip the purpose, everything you assign starts to feel like meaningless busy work that just doesn't matter. The translation is actually quite simple because instead of saying you need a report by Friday, you explain that the report is due because the client presentation is on Monday, and this specific data determines if the company keeps their business. Suddenly, that task has a real reason for existing and is connected to a high-stakes outcome. You aren't just handing down an order from above, you're providing the kind of context that allows your team to take true ownership of the results. The second big shift involves leaning into high-context brevity, which is how Gen Z already communicates in their daily lives. If you look at how they use TikToks or DMs, you'll see they are used to getting to the point immediately without any fluff. They don't want to read a 3-paragraph corporate email preamble that says nothing, so you need to learn how to distill your message down to the goal, the stakes, and the action. Think back to my classroom mistake where I told students to network strategically and nobody moved. The version that actually worked was telling them to go meet people who have the power to hire them, which is the definition of high-context brevity. It is essentially saying the quiet part out loud to cut through the vagueness so your words actually land with some kind of real impact. We can apply this to those 3 banned phrases we talked about earlier to see how a practical translation works in the real world. First, instead of telling someone you want to circle back, you should tell them you want to talk about the issue tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Specificity is always going to beat vagueness when you're trying to get things done. Second, you should swap out leverage synergy for a simple request to work together on a project. It isn't a revolutionary change, but it is much clearer for everyone involved. And third, you need to kill the phrase align our strategic objectives and replace it with a clear statement of what the goal is and what success needs to look like by the end of the week. The psychology behind this is straightforward because when people understand the reason behind a request, they start to own the execution of it. You aren't just looking for people to comply with your rules, you're trying to build real buy-in across the board. And by making this change, you trade the illusion of control for a team that is actually engaged for the mission you set out for them. And this is how you move from being a boss who just manages a list of tasks to a leader who builds genuine belief in a vision. For a generation that puts authenticity and purpose above everything else, changing your language isn't just a nice gesture, it's the only way you'll ever lead them effectively. All of this leads us to the most important part of the equation, which is the trust you build with your team. This process of translating your words and being clear isn't just about making the office run more efficiently. It's about building the personal credibility you need to actually lead people. And with Gen Z, the fastest way to earn that is by dropping the professional facade entirely. You have to remember that these younger employees can spot a performance or a fake personality from a mile away. The old school playbook of pretending you have every single answer or faking it until you make it will completely backfire on you today. It doesn't make you look like a confident leader. It makes you look insecure and out of touch. The best way to handle this is to talk like you're correct, but listen like you're wrong. You should state your decisions with total clarity, but then you have to immediately open the floor with genuine curiosity. You need to listen as if you might be missing a key piece of the puzzle, because the truth is that you usually are. When you adopt this mindset, your language shifts from giving orders to inviting your team to give their input. Instead of telling them to execute a plan you've already finished, you should explain the situation as you see it and ask what you're missing. You aren't giving up your authority by doing this. You're just using the collective intelligence of the people that you actually hired. Showing respect for their perspective is something they value immensely, and it makes them much more likely to follow your lead. And this is the ultimate shift you have to make if you want to lead through influence rather than authority. Gen Z will follow a job title because they don't have a choice, but they will follow a leader they believe in because they actually want to be there. They don't decide who to trust based on where your name sits on an organizational chart. They base that decision on the respect and authenticity you show them when you speak to them. When you finally drop that corporate armor and talk to them like a capable human being, you're finally speaking the only language that can actually build a real team. If you want to see if this actually works, I have a specific mission for you to try this week. I call it the 1 meeting challenge, and the rules are really pretty simple. During your very next sit down with a Gen Z employee, or honestly, anyone on your team, your only goal is to get through the entire conversation without using a single bit of boss speak. To make this work, you just need to follow a basic 3-part plan. You start by stripping out every piece of corporate jargon, which means no pivoting, no circling back, no leveraging assets, and definitely no aligning of visions. Once the fluff is gone, you state the actual purpose of the meeting in one plain sentence. And then you finish by asking a real question that forces them to give you an honest opinion. If you need a starting point, you can use this exact script. Just open the conversation by saying, the goal for this week is to get your customer response rates up by 20%. So what ideas do you have that I might be missing right now? That short script changes the energy of the room immediately because it provides total clarity on what the target is while handing over the keys to the employee. By asking for their input, you show that you don't think you have a monopoly on good ideas, and that kind of respect is exactly how you build a sense of ownership. You will likely feel the engagement shift the moment you stop talking, because when people feel like they own a project, they actually deliver results. Give it a shot in your next one-on-one by ditching the jargon and just talking like a person. The reality here is that Gen Z doesn't actually have a problem with leadership, but they do have a very low tolerance for bad communication. The most effective leaders are always the ones who can adapt their language so they are actually understood by the people following them. If you take away one thing from this, let it be that you should swap out vague corporate phrases for direct human conversation. That's all for today. Remember, we're looking for progress, not perfection. Be sure to visit speakingwithconfidencepodcast.com to get your free ebook, The Top 21 Challenges for Public Speakers and How to Overcome Them. You can also register for the Formula for Public Speaking course. Always remember, your voice has the power to change it. We'll talk to you next time. Take care.